But honest to goodness, technology has spent more time thinking about what I want to watch on Friday than my risk for colon cancer. There are folks who are going to the highest cost MRI versus the lowest cost MRI because there's nothing in the system that tells them where is it best to go to get the highest value. We don't need to build another instrument for the orchestra. We need to conduct the orchestra.
What is it about this industry, both that attracts people who just refuse to give up, will not stop, but also just sign up for a way more challenging go of it?
I am so glad I did this, and I will never leave healthcare, and I will keep trying to fix what is broken.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Lifers. I want to give a warm welcome to Michelle Carnahan, who is a guest that I have been excited to have on for several months now. When Michelle and I first met for lunch here in New York, I had this moment of thinking, how have our lives not crossed already? Because she and I just have so many mutual friends and connections. She's had this incredible career spanning pharma across roles in strategy, marketing, operations. She's held senior roles at Eli Lilly and Sanofi, or is it Sanofi? Michelle will have to tell me because I can never get it right. And then she made a move into direct-to-consumer health, an executive role at Madison, and I'm excited to chat about that. And now she has a new startup, Arbiter, which just raised $52 million at a valuation of $400 million, with the goal to unite payers and providers to solve the fragmentation crisis in healthcare. So I have so many questions for Michelle on everything from the rise of GLP-1s. She had a front seat in her prior life in pharma, to what I am now calling the shadow healthcare system, which is everything that we're seeing in cash pay healthcare. And then, of course, what she's doing in this new role. So, Michelle, thank you so much for joining me today.
Chrissy, thank you so much. I have to tell you, like probably so many people and you in health tech, you didn't know me, but I felt like I knew you. So, but the fact that our paths hadn't crossed was really very interesting. Also, I can't say kind of what an honor and privilege it is. I think I'm going to be your first episode out of Lifers, and I love the idea, and I'm really honored.
So let's start there, because the Lifers concept really came to me when I realized that when I started out in healthcare, which is about 15 years ago, a lot of the people starting companies back then in 2010, 2011, they're still at it. Still the same companies, still chugging away. And meantime, my husband's always been more involved in areas like cybersecurity and enterprise software and developer tools. And all of his friends are on their third, fourth, fifth companies. Some of them have developed a lot of wealth in the process. And I thought, what is it about this industry, both that attracts people who just refuse to give up, will not stop, but also just sign up for a way more challenging go of it? And I feel like that's you. So I'd love to know what got you fixated on healthcare. What made you want to spend your career doing this?
Yeah. As a little girl, I always wanted to be a doctor. That was always what I wanted to do. And then found out I had quite an aversion to blood. And so that didn't work out. So when I graduated undergrad, I had grown up in Indiana, went to college in Indiana, and there was Lilly, and got the opportunity to go to work at Lilly. And at the time, this is really going to date me. I had an offer at Lilly, an offer at P&G, and an offer at the old Arthur Anderson. And I just, I said to myself, like, nothing wrong with selling soap, but I want to work in medicines. And, the doctor thing had come along with it. And I did it. And I was at Lilly for 25 years. But there's one story I love to tell, which is why I tell anyone who's young starting their career that healthcare is where to go. Was working on a drug called Jardiance. And it was in a joint venture with Boehringer Ingelheim at Lilly, and working on the drug. And the drug had a chance to show all-cause mortality reduction in patients with diabetes. And nobody thought the study was going to work. Turns out that the study worked. 33% relative risk reduction in all-cause mortality for individuals with type 2 diabetes. And what's really interesting about this story is that my father-in-law had passed away from coronary complications due to type 2 diabetes. The day we got the news that this drug had shown this incredible outcome was my son's birthday. My son, who was born a year after my father in law never got to meet him, would have loved to have met him. And at that point, and this is probably about 17 years in my career when this all came to fruition. And at that point, I thought, I am so glad I did this and I will never leave healthcare. And I will keep trying to fix what is broken in healthcare. There's just something about, Christy Shaw and her sister have an organization called Making Moments. There is something about the fact that a 33% relative risk reduction in all cause mortality. Maybe a grandfather saw his grandson that wouldn't have otherwise. Maybe a mother got to her daughter's wedding. And you just like, what kind of career, Chrissy, can you get that in except for a healthcare career? I love it because it's intellectually challenging. I love it because it's fast moving, but mainly I love it because you do touch lives and we do some things wrong along the way. We don't always get it right. And there's a ton of brokenness in it. But to me, it's just a place that if you stop and think about it, every day is a real reward.
Yeah, that really resonates with me. And I think also what you said about that drug that nobody thought was good working. I mean, it shows that you get the element of surprise in the day job, which I think is also really special about healthcare. But what I really love about, as I was looking at just the really incredible career that you've had, you didn't choose to just stay in pharma. You could have been in big pharma your whole career. Plenty of people do that. They pick one corner of healthcare and they develop a lot of expertise in that area. And that is what they do for their whole careers. You at some point said, nope, I'm going to go do something else, which is when you ended up at 30 Madison and now more focused on the payer provider side of things. So I think you've truly touched every part of healthcare at this point. Tell me what made you want to really say, okay, I got it on pharma. I know what's going on here, and then want to attack different parts of the system.
Yeah, so let me say a sentence here that will probably not be heard often on this podcast. I loved big pharma. I loved everything about it. I loved working there. They get things wrong without question, but I really liked it. So it had nothing to do with like, oh, I don't like this. I want to do, I want to do something else. This isn't interesting. It had to do with two major things. First is big pharma is exactly that, big. And I wanted to go out and do some things that I could touch and I could lead and I could really be the impact where I was. But the second main reason I went back is all these medicines that we made and the drug for diabetes that had the all cause mortality study, all of that is great. But a drug is only hope in a bottle or hope in a syringe until it gets to a patient. And I saw this thing with access that I really wanted to take on in the second half of my career. Like, how do we get better access in the United States to medicine, to care? And that's what drew me to 30 Madison because it was this place where they were making care totally frictionless. And what was so interesting to me, and we were doing it by asynchronous, telesessions. What was so interesting to me about what they were doing was the result was so much better adherence. Like patients were sending these messages like, I couldn't even get in to see a physician and I'd had these migraines for so long and like you changed my life. We saw adherence on medication that was better. And I saw what happened when you took the friction out of healthcare. So your question was what brought me here? It was the chance to really lead and shape things and also the chance to really I want my life's work to be two things at the end of the day. Did I do something to improve the access and the experiences that patients have in this country? Right now, so many times you enter the healthcare system and suffering begets suffering. You're suffering enough when you get there. Did I do something to help access? And then also women in leadership is a near and dear role to me too. So those two things are what I'm after. And so that's how I made my way into the world of startups.
Okay, so I'm going to get right into it with a kind of a tough question that I grapple with on the topic of access. So, on the one hand, you've got all these companies and this shadow healthcare system that we talked about that really are improving access, making it very easy for patients to get medications online and have them delivered. Let's talk about the spectrum because my husband, who has ADHD, he's in the traditional system and I feel like it's overkill, the amount that they are telling him that he has to have all these visits to check the medications, reconfirm that he has ADHD. And sometimes it feels like this is just a byproduct of the very procedure-based billing system that we have. And then on the other hand, you have these cash pay companies that make it really easy. And, now we've got the first criminal investigations into several of these companies that said it was too easy and that there weren't the proper checks and balances to safeguard patients. And so what do you think from your experiences here? What is the right amount of access that we should be giving patients where maybe we're not doing the paternalistic thing, but we're also keeping them safe?
I think your point is a very good one. And I think in healthcare, I used to work for a guy who had this expression when I was at Lilly, and it was, we're not selling Hershey bars. Not that there's anything wrong with selling Hershey bars, but that's not what we do. And so I think I'd start all this by saying, if I had to react to your question, I would say, in terms of healthcare, my mom's healthcare, my son's healthcare, over is better than under. So let me just say that for the record, if you have to default. You're getting into, frankly, a little bit of what Arbiter is trying to fix. And that is, how onerous does that overabundance of follow up really need to be? How time consuming does it need to be? We have a sign in our office that says fragmentation's killing healthcare. And some of what you see when you go to the other side that you're talking about, which is numerous follow-ups and getting scheduled, and it all becomes an incredibly laborious process. How can we use technology to help us with that? How do we balance those things together? So my first answer to your question is, I'd rather have over than under in any of my loved ones' healthcare. My second answer is, at the end of the day, I think technology needs to play a role in how do we balance the technology that's there today and the capabilities that we have today to make this process for your husband a little less laborious and friction filled. Because when it's friction filled, you don't get to the other end of it quite often. And so we're looking at things like the follow up that is needed. How do we make sure that we're very specific with patients on what is that follow up? How are we reaching out about that follow up in a seamless way and getting it scheduled seamlessly? So that's how I'd answer the question. But I think it is a fit between the two. I also think that some conditions are suited better, some medications are suited better to have less intervention. And we have to be wise about what those are. It cannot be a one size fits all.
Hey everyone, we'll get right back to the conversation after a word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Arbiter, the care orchestration platform. In a healthcare system full of silos, Arbiter is a unifying layer. Backed by one of the largest early funding rounds in health tech history, Arbiter brings payers, providers, and patients together on one intelligent platform, routing referrals to the best in-network option, managing authorizations and outreach, and coordinating appointments seamlessly. See how it works at arbiter.ai. I would be remiss not to ask you what it was like to be in big pharma and then in direct-to-consumer healthcare with the rise of the GLP-1s. And you and I talked about this extensively at lunch because I was just peppering you with endless questions around everything from side effects to how cheap can these things get to what's coming down the pike. So I think our audience would love to hear a little bit more about that, just what it was like to be in that seat, knowing that these drugs were coming to market. And then let's talk about everything that we're seeing now, because every single day in the news, there is some big story about GLP-1s as we kind of battle for, this question of price and cost to society versus access. There's so many important questions here. But yes, before we get into all that, give us the bird's eye view. What was it like?
I would love to. I could talk about it forever. And as I always like to say, probably at Eli Lilly and Company right now, or Novo Nordisk, success has a million fathers, failure's a lonely orphan, or in my case, mothers. Everybody was in on the ground floor someplace. But I'll talk about where I was. I keep trying to remember the year. I can't remember the year, but I was working on the diabetes team for Enrique Quintero, and I was leading kind of strategy and business development in that world. And we were at one of our kind of quarterly portfolio reviews of the portfolio, and we saw the first results of tirzepatide. And I remember Enrique leaning back into his chair and looking at the results, and the room got really quiet. And he goes, these gyp glips, they're really gonna be something. And I still call that I still call terzepatide a gyp glip because as we know, it's a dual agonist versus a single agonist. But it's like you kind of there's lots of fun things from your career to remember. But that was a really fun one. There was really a lot of debate at the time around how can I mean, I remember talking to one of our smartest endocrinologists at Lilly, and he's like, I don't know. I just don't know if this drug can really do it. Like we have these set points for our weight, and they're just these set points. And, it's like thousands and thousands of years of evolution. And can this really work? And so, I mean, it was interesting. I think we had to, at Lilly, in my opinion, I think we had to really kind of get used to and work ourselves into what it could be. We were a very serious diabetes company, not as serious on the weight loss space because I think we just saw it as so insurmountable. And then so then you start to kind of take that in and I was there when we were taking in that. Now I imagine if you're working there and I talk to my friends who are still there, now you're taking in what the amazing path that these drugs have beyond the weight loss question. And I am not affiliated with any of these companies anymore, so I could say these kind of things, but just the incredible impact it can have on your metabolic health has on all of you, right? And so, it's another reason why any of you young people out there looking for a career, that's another reason why I love this lifers and healthcare thing, because at the end of the day, this drug could have impact on changing the diabetes epidemic that causes millions and millions of people in this country to lose their limbs every year, causes millions and millions of people to die, to go blind. We have a chance to fix that now. And so, like the weight and the understanding of that, it wasn't like, oh, I mean, we kind of, like I said, as his response, he was like, goes, these chip clips, they're really going to be something. And I think both companies, Novo and Lilly, kind of had to grow into it to understand what all it could be. And I think there's a whole big path beyond. The thing I always worried about and still worry about, but the recent announcement in Washington, I honestly thought was great is, this drug, the amazing part of this drug, look, listen, as somebody who's had a weight problem all their life, like I love it. I think it's fantastic. And, I might even love it if I had to lose 10 pounds for a wedding, but that's not who it's for. It is for people whose obesity is killing them. And that is what it is really doing. And if you think about the societal impact of that, it's crazy, but it gets to your point and the other part of your question, which is this question about how do we make sure we get it to a lot of the right people? And then how do we wrap the right things around it? Because food deserts will remain food deserts, even if I can get tirzepatide on Medicaid or, so I think that honestly, I've been fairly impressed with my colleagues at Lilly at seriously taking on that question. This was going to be a big drug and do a lot of things, even if it never made it to the people who were most in need and couldn't afford it. And I see we're making progress to that. I think the thing we have to remember is, I don't even know what the price is anymore, $189, 229, whatever it is. That price is still a lot for a lot of people monthly. So we still have a ways to go. Look, I'm a big believer, and I'm not a health economist by training, but I am a big believer if we get this, not to the people who want to lose, X amount of pounds, but if we get this to the folks with serious type 2 diabetes, that the reward will outweigh the cost because the price of an amputation, the price of going blind, the price of heart disease, the price of kidney failure and kidney dialysis is so huge. And that's what's happening in that space. So I think they've done a good job. There's still going to be work to do on the affordability. Do I think these drugs can get better? It sure looks like they can. I think the big unlock, and it goes back to that conversation I was having with this world renowned endocrinologist at Lilly who said, yeah, Michelle, I get that you're a business person and you see those numbers and you're super excited. But I'm just here to tell you, I've been in endocrinology for years. I've watched type 2 diabetes for years. And at the end of the day, your weight's a set point. And so I think we have to take in that it can do these things now to really decide where and how do we build on it and how do we price it and how do we get it to the folks that matter. But look, I think we're making more progress than we would have made 10 years ago. And that I really like seeing that because I'm a really big believer that this drug's going to save so many lives.
Yeah. And I think it already is. And then it's having so many consequences that nobody really expected around things like substance use. And I just saw for sleep apnea, there's so many different indications, even outside of type 2 diabetes. But hot protection, would love from you. What do you think is the floor on pricing?
Oh my goodness. Well, at some point you'll have biosimilars on the market, so you'll have a real floor. Again, someone who's not affiliated with any of these organizations and have been out of pharma market for 5 long years. I think the floor is around for the GIP GLPs, I think it's gonna be a little bit higher just because I think they're better drugs. They've been on the market a shorter time. Someplace between gosh, Chris, this is a hard question for a non-pharma executive
If
these
you had to
days.
guess, we won't hold you to it.
Okay. So I'm saying 159 to 199 starting dose is where the floor is going to be. I think what's going to be interesting, and I haven't looked at this in detail, but I think what's going to be interesting is let's also make sure that the discounting continues up in ways it's affordable. This is a drug you have to titrate. And for those people who really maybe need major weight loss, you've got to titrate it. And so I do know that some of the drugs at the higher doses now are still higher priced. I don't know what they are. So, to me, 159 to 199 is a floor. Do you get where the average across all the doses is 250 to 300? That might be a positive. I think it's going to be fascinating too, frankly. We could have a whole show about this question around, is this going to open up different distribution models in the pharma market? And what are those going to look like if it does?
I think
Because
it already has.
I totally agree with you. But to me, what's going to be the super changing piece is when it opens up the distribution for someplace, a third to a half of all patients. That's going to be really interesting, I think.
Should I have been calling it GLPs this whole time? Because I've been saying GLP-1s.
Well, that's the old Lilly Building 14 shorthand, I think. So no, because I will say that because it's funny because I'm like I have so many other interesting things to ask me about, but everybody asks me these questions, and I'll be like GLPs, GLPs, and they'll be like, well, I'll be like the GLPs.
Okay, I'm as long as I wasn't saying it wrong the whole time. So let's just connecting this topic to the rest of healthcare. I think these drugs, talked about the impact that they're already having. I think one of the really interesting things that's happening now in light of these drugs and a few other like really high cost treatments and interventions that we have coming down the pike is we are now really asking questions about health insurance. Questions around what is the role of health insurance? Should it be this super expensive, all encompassing thing that we all pay, $25,000 for a year? And still have deductibles and copays and whatnot, but we say it covers everything, right? Or increasingly now, I'm hearing this analogy of health insurance and car insurance that imagine how expensive car insurance would be if it covered everything inclusive of oil changes. And most people only have car insurance for that catastrophic moment of a serious accident, right? So, is that the model that we should be thinking about? And I think the GLP-1s have pushed us into asking those questions faster. And I'm seeing it manifesting in the market today, even with the jumbo employers that tend to be the most risk averse, where you're seeing them say, instead of just covering these medications and doing the PBM list price rebate thing, let's just do the defined contribution thing and carve it out and say, here is a set amount of dollars. It's cheaper to pay cash, go pay cash, right? And we're not going to tell you that, you can't do it if you don't have this set of things wrong with you. If you feel that you need it, go get it, right? We're going to subsidize it. And I think that's really a fascinating thing, just the impact that that's having already in healthcare. So now that you're out of big pharma, you're out of D2C, and you're now moving more into, the traditional system in your new role. Curious for your thoughts on that. And do you see or agree with these transformative shifts underway in the world of health insurance?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me say a few things on that because that is like such an incredible topic. So I think the first thing, Chrissy, that's so important is it isn't one solution. It isn't okay. Let's make sure the subsidies are back for ACA. That'll do it. No, it won't do it. It isn't. Let's just make the insurers the terrible bad guys and how highly defined. That's not going to do it. It is finding the right mix down the middle. And for a country that so much talks about we don't want a nationalized system, then why the heck are we trying all these one size fits all solutions? Let's solve differently. And, I see it in three big buckets, right? There are folks who need and value the model as it exists today. I think it's an option. I think it needs work, but I think it's an option. I think there is this other model for folks like my son who are just getting out into the workforce, who is young and healthy and knock on wood stays that way for a while. There's a different type of health insurance. And third, I think there are some things that we just need to take to the free market and let the free market drive it, right? And this kind of does fit right in many ways with a piece of what we're talking about at Arbiter, because what we're trying to do is say, tech in some ways has let down healthcare because it's so fragmented, right? Everything's here, there, and everywhere. And one hand doesn't know what the other hand is doing. And it's crazy. And that is putting all kinds of waste into the system. And so, as we talk about what's the next solution, and it can be any of those three things that I talked about, should be some combination of those three, but somebody has to talk to somebody to get that done. While that's happening, what we're trying to do with Arbiter is say, we want to create AI powered care orchestration that connects all of your healthcare. So today, healthcare runs on more than $100 billion in fragmented systems. And what we want to do with Arbiter is set that above the existing EMRs and workflows so we can consolidate what's duplicative and orchestrate what's essential. So it's one intelligent platform, not a point solution, but something that's looking across. So take, for instance, what we call our wedge product, care optimization. Care optimization is an example of where this technology system really needs to come together. Half of all specialty referrals that happen are missed. No one ever goes to those specialty referrals, which is really quite amazing. What we're trying to do with our full Arbiter system around site of care optimization is we are trying to say it's an ideal proving ground to go back to taking the record of the patient, driving it to an action, and then driving alignment to what's happening. Right now, there are these millions of missed appointments, and there are folks who are going to the highest cost MRI versus the lowest cost MRI because there's nothing in the system that tells them where is it best to go to get the highest value MRI. That's what you want. The highest value MRI that also, serves you where you are and all of those other pieces. And so one of the things that we're trying to do is orchestrate all that together so that when my doctor says to me, Michelle, you have an MRI, you're in network at ABC system, but you're out of network at XYZ system at ABC, that's where you should go because that's the highest value and we'll work to get you in there. And so what we're doing is building the record for the patient, which we will take by overlaying the EMRs and also other interesting and useful patient facts and figures. We're putting AI agents on to create a bit of an action on that. So, where is that lowest cost of care? That's the highest quality. And then, how do we get you there? So, using AI agents to help schedule and to help pull it through so it works at a time for you takes that administrative stuff out of the healthcare provider setting because they should be providing healthcare and works to make all of that happen. We think as we do that, we've looked at some major hospital systems around the country. And by working with not only the hospital system, but the payers who are involved, we think just by helping folks stay in network and understand where's that MRI that's in network, where's that colonoscopy that's in network, we think we can do savings on those types of cares by up to 30 to 35%. So, I think while we're looking to fix it and pull things together and build different systems, we're trying to make the system we have more efficient. Move that forward, Arbiter will launch with a reactive system. So if you go to the doctor, you get this, but really want to move to a proactive system. So my technology can scan a provider's records and say, here are all the people over 55 in your practice who have never had a colonoscopy. And then my back end AI agentics can reach out and talk with those people, schedule the appointments, get them the prior auths that they need in a timely manner, and get them in. So, we'll want to move from reactive to proactive to ultimately, and this is a little ways down the road, predictive. If the patient is your true north, wherever you are in healthcare, trying to get conversations happening that are helping the patient and bettering their healthcare, if that's your true north, you're going to have a good business in healthcare. I mean, we'll overcomplicate it in a million ways, but that's what's going to solve healthcare's issue is put the patient back in the center, build the technology that is centered on that patient and makes their world less seamless. And back to your plan, give them the plan that works for them at that point in their life where they are. And we're going to do a lot better. It's not as simple as my three little sentences there. I don't mean to be trite at all. There are huge costs. There are huge things to figure out. But if we would all just kind of go back, get together to talk about what is happening and then build the fix backwards.
So here's my little skeptical brain. I'm just going to throw a bunch of false questions at you. AI is, obviously a lot of people talking about it. APIs, a lot fewer people talking about it. To do what you're talking about, you need AI and APIs. And the challenge, I think, has been APIs. So how do you even get your hooks into all these systems that you spoke about that may not necessarily want to be relegated as the layer that you sit on top of or they're the below layer and you're the application layer that touches the patient and the provider?
So that was one of the first questions I talked with my two co-founders about, who are really big brain in the sky people. And I was like, I'm going to come in and do it. But here's my issue. Like, my issue is exactly what you said. And look, I've built very little tech at Lilly, a fair amount of tech at 30 Madison, and probably have some scars to show for it. I'm like, what? Like, I'm really worried about, can a tech even, like, what is the API? Can it really even do it? Can it do it? And it's one of the reasons we bought the technology that we bought going into this deal, which is that what we call a Cody technology, our own name for it, but it's what actually goes in and integrates to pull that record and makes it work and gives you something to work with. So the AI matters, to your point, right? Without that, it doesn't matter all day. On the technology part, frankly, I'm feeling way more bullish than I was 7 months ago. Now the trick will become, and this is the trick you're referring to, is there are a lot of companies out there doing those pieces. Do they want theirs integrated in? And how do we get that to happen? And my answer goes back to that. Again, my simple trite answer in some ways is you have to take payers and you have to take providers and take them back to the patient levels. And if it helps patient care and makes it more efficient and makes it a higher value, then I think you get more cooperation from the ecosystems about integrating. So I'm not saying we have tech 100% figured out, but I feel pretty good about where we are. It's a technology that a small company had been working on for some time. I feel like now it's bringing the payers and the providers to the table together to say, you've got all these systems, they say all these different things. If one could say all of them, like, how exciting would that be? And what would that do?
And they're both the providers and the payers of the customers?
Yes. Yes.
And they are also the buyers?
Yes. Because I spent so many years in traditional healthcare and spent so many years in big pharma talking about big bad PBMs. And yeah, I mean, you know how it goes. Everybody Everybody kind of
Everybody points the finger. It's the great finger pointing
else.
industry.
I, I've been guilty too. So but as I told you, one of the reasons I came over into this world was because I want to make a difference in access. And to me, one of the big ideas I brought to Arbiter in working with Simca and Eric, one of the big ideas I brought is like, look, guys, we shouldn't build another siloed system. We have to have tech that's not siloed. I'll use this analogy on you because I really love it. We don't need to build another instrument for the orchestra. We need to conduct the orchestra. So we need to conduct this technology. If we get all the technology together, then all the data comes together. And we all know people can yammer on all day long or put AI at the end of their company name. If there's not strong data to back it up, it's not much of an AI company because the AI is only as smart as the data. So I said, we've got to bring together technology and data. And I said, the final thing we've got to bring together are the stakeholders. Like we have to take this back to, I don't want to just sell something to a provider. I want to sell something to a provider and a payer. Now we'll have products in our system of products that may be great one-offs. We have an incredible scheduling and patient follow-up AI agentics that we're building that will be kind of fantastic. And it may be that a provider system wants to sell them. With Arbiter, what I want to do is because it's all based on some data that's over here, some data that's over here, I want to bring that together. And so from being around this world for years and Eric being around the world for years, we brought a few friends in a room and it took a couple dinners. Everybody kind of started to like.
I love that because I always say healthcare is a steak dinner industry. I don't even eat steak, by the way. I'm a vegetarian, but it's the idea that there are like 20 people in the industry, it seems like sometimes, who actually have power. And this is why I personally would not invest in a company that was attacking the US healthcare system where their founders were not in this country. And I'm a Brit, so I want those companies to succeed. But to me, it's like you have to be in the room and you have got to be doing the convening and having the conversations with those people because otherwise you do not get anywhere. So I love that you did that.
I'm surprised in this launch how much the story has been picked up that we chose to raise through family offices and private equity. And honestly, chose to raise through family offices and private equity that were very healthcare focused, like Winrose or Valtrius, But the reason why for that is because I wanted two things to happen. Actually, I wanted three things to happen. One, I wanted people who really understood healthcare, who knew how complex the problem was. Two, I wanted people who had a little longer tail on their money and could afford to invest in what it's going to take to get this done. But three, I wanted people who knew the people in the room. And it's not as easy as, okay, now we know the people in the room and we had dinner. It doesn't happen like that. But you've got to get the people in the room to start to have the conversation. And so to make this story quick, we got the people in the room, we had the conversations. Then we had the side conversations where my friend from the provider over here was like, Michelle, but can you really? And my payer friend was like, yeah, Michelle, but can you really? And then we got together and we said, here's a plan. Like, here is a problem that impacts both of you. Side of care optimization, right? If you're a big healthcare system, you do not want your referrals all going out of your healthcare system. And if you're a payer where that healthcare system has a better price point, you don't want those going out either. And the patient doesn't want them going out because their copays are higher. Like, can everybody get along on that? Yes, we can. But it's still funny to this day. We're working with a couple on trying to get the full Arbiter out, and I'll still get calls around, well, they did this or they did that. I'm like, yeah, y'all are still going to do things to each other. But it's been fun. It's also when I was out raising, it's also one of the biggest questions I get. Like, Michelle, these people do not work together. But I found like people want to get to a solution.
I always say this to companies that feel so reluctant to call out what's really going on in our healthcare system that every individual person that I know who's working on the payer side, the pharma side, wherever you sit, people are very self-aware. They know where the company that they are affiliated with, where that company is providing both good and bad. And
Yes.
so, we know what went wrong. And I really, I'm not even that optimistic a person, but there is some optimistic part of me that does believe that there are people working in the system on an individual level who are still doing it because they genuinely want to make it better. So, okay, Michelle, we are running out of time, and I want to ask you, because I know that you love analogies and metaphors, and I love analogies and metaphors as well. If we consider that healthcare is about 20 years behind any other industry out there when it comes to technology, certainly behind banking, behind probably everything except maybe education, is there an analogy from another industry that you could draw upon and say, high in the sky, if we achieve all of our wildest dreams and ambitions with what we're building at Arbiter, it looks like X in another industry that we're all familiar with?
There isn't one that I can make that is direct, but I will say this. The one I always pull to, right, is why isn't technology thinking in the same sophisticated way it's thinking about my healthcare data as it is when I sit down on a Friday night, which I do every Friday night, and go into my Netflix queue or my HBO Max queue and look at what they're telling me to watch next because of what I've watched. And so to me, it's not an analogy, but what it is there is so much information out there. Why aren't we getting better at pulling the information out to make the simple decisions and to help give hints in the hard decisions? And it's one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about this kind of having the record as the base of everything Arbiter does, and then getting it to agents that can look at actions on different questions that you might have about healthcare, and then finding in a way to get that to the patient and the provider so they can be aligned. So to me, it's not that we should be thinking about our healthcare like we think about our movies on a Friday night. But honest to goodness, technology has spent more time thinking about what I want to watch on Friday than my risk for colon cancer because my grandmother had it and my mother had it.
That's great. I love that. And I agree. Why can't we be doing basic predictive work based on things that we already know? So, okay, we're out of time. But before we go, you mentioned Friday night. It's Friday, the time that we're recording this podcast. What is the last great show that you watch, next great show that you plan to watch? And I will happily share mine.
Oh, I love this question because I have this secret. Like I'm a TV junkie. And when I say I will not go to dinner with people on Friday night. I will not go to business meetings on Friday night. I watch TV every Friday night.
You're like my kind of person then, because I'm the same way. And that's what I'm planning to do tonight.
I light a candle. Tonight, I'm going out of town for Thanksgiving. So my Christmas tree's up. It's going to be great. Tonight's going to be great. I'm already thinking about tonight. I really like that Claire Danes show. I'm a really big Claire Danes show that's on Netflix right now. That'll be The Beast in Me, the Claire Danes one.
I can barely watch that show because of just having worked in broadcast television. But mine are, in case anyone needs a TV recommendation, I think The Pit. If you are in healthcare, you have got to watch that show. And one of our guests, Graham Walker, I think did some advisory work on that show because he works in the emergency room. You got to watch The Pit. And then the show that I have just started and I'm already obsessed with because I love history is The Gilded Age. Same group as Downton Abbey. So it will scratch that itch if you love Downton Abbey, but a lot of great American history and the formation of the railroads. And it's just fascinating. So those are my two. And Michelle, with that, maybe I will send you a little text tonight when I've got my show on and my glass of wine. I just have really enjoyed this conversation. I feel like we got into some deep topics. We got into GLP-1s, which I've been longing to bring you on and talk about. I think we have much more to say. So maybe what I will leave you with is an ask, which is, will you come back and do this again?
I absolutely would love to. So, Chrissy, I'll tell you, I have been a fangirl for so many years. And so it's quite an honor to be here. And this felt a lot like our lunch. So thanks, Chrissy.
Thank you very much. That's a wrap on Lifers. If you know someone else grinding it out in healthcare, send them this episode. And if you want more unfiltered takes on digital health, check out the Second Opinion newsletter. Link in the show notes.